So when we made the decision to make our HRO Today EMEA magazine more local by working with an editor-at-large, I was looking for someone who understands the HR industry, understands challenges unique to EMEA, and has a voice that speaks to best practices and trends. And I found that in Simon Kent. Simon is a writer and editor based in the United Kingdom. He has written extensively on HR, including recruiting, career progression, and technology. Today, he will engage us with an interactive discussion on talent. Join me in welcoming Simon Kent and a panel of TA professionals to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Debbie. And thank you for having me, I have to say. When I started writing in this field, I was writing for The Guardian about careers. And at the time when I was writing, the big thing in the workplace was a thing called the death of the job. It was a point in time when employers felt that they could no longer offer a job for life, something that was consistent, something that you would start off with a graduate or a newcomer into the workplace, and you would sort of see them all the way through to their retirement. And it was just at that point where that kind of deal was beginning to disappear, essentially. And this was seen as something that was it was going to change the world, it was going to change the world of work, and so on. If I think about that change compared to where we are now, with social media, with the gig economy, with all of these different things that are thrown at us in the workplace, the plethora of different things, millennial, Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, snowflake generation, all of these kind of things, it occurs to me that the whole thing has become far more complicated than ever before. And rather than it being a case of employers not being able to offer something obvious to their employees or candidates, it's now a kind of complicated thing in both directions. What do the candidates want? What can you offer them? And more importantly, how can you connect, engage, talk to them in a way that they understand and respond to? Now, I've heard a lot about talent acquisition this afternoon, and heard a lot about people who are doing it right and so on. So I hope during this session, we're able to sort of talk about a bit of the practicalities about that, a bit of the, sort of bring it a bit down to earth, and maybe sort of get some comments and some of your own questions and queries sort of raised. I can't guarantee we're going to answer them in any way, shape or form, but at least in these kind of things, if we have the opportunity to sort of share and give these things a voice, then sometimes that sort of helps us navigate our way through what is now a very complicated situation. So I'd like to thank all three members of the panel today. We have Vivian, who is from Corn Ferry, the Vice President of Quality Operations Excellence.
Yeah, I don't try and describe that to my parents. I just say I'm in recruitment.
I'm in recruitment, that's fine. We have Kevin Blair in the middle, who is the former Global TA for IBM. And we have Ingrid Krajbeek. Thank you, I got the second name correct. I've been practicing it all day. Who is the HR Director of HR Operations for Bridgestone. So thank you all for coming. I'd like to start off by asking you all to sort of share with us some of your own challenges in terms of talent at the moment. What do you think are the most challenging roles that you are trying to fill? And sort of, are they dependent on skills, experience? What kind of things are you seeing? Okay. You want to start?
Oh, yes. So we are the world's largest tire and rubber manufacturer. So everybody kind of, if you know Michelin, if you know Pirelli, you should know us, I hope. And we're actually transitioning because of the world of mobility changing, self-driving vehicles, the whole world of, smart cities. Which means that we are looking for completely different talent than just the guys that are building the tire. So for us, it's all about big data, blockchain. How do we get data from the tire when it's rolling? And what kind of predictive analysis can we get out of the product, which is completely out of our comfort zone.
Right.
Because we know how to find the tire fitters, the guys who build the tire, but actually the guys that are interpreting the data once it's rolling, black box. That's our challenge.
Right. So is it more of a kind of technical skill set that you're looking for?
Yeah.
And would you say that skill set actually exists? Or, I mean, you're talking about blockchain, things like that. It sounds sort of, you're almost looking for something in the future.
Well, we know it's out there. It's just how do we get those people to be excited about a tire? Because we're not Google, we're not Apple, but that's the kind of talent that we need. People who love analytics, who want to do, the big data, scrunching, all that stuff. But of course, if you can, choose between the big brands that everybody knows versus a black product with a hole in the middle, it's a difficult sell. But the talent is out there. We just need to get them excited about the tire.
Sure. I think that really that probably reflects my problem from a different angle, having only ever worked in talent acquisition and technology companies, having watched up until maybe even 5 or 6 years ago, the only people we were competing for talent with was similar companies, similar organizations. Right. So in the ring, battling out for talent, you would have had people a much narrower field. But now, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have dreamed that technology companies would be going head to head with a tire company for blockchain talent. So there's this issue that there's already a scarcity of talent within the market from a skills perspective, which is, without getting into that whole debate, I mean, it's foundational issues at an educational level as much as anything, but also in evolving, it's displacement through AI, which is really important and a really positive thing. We just heard from the guys about AI, but displacement is a very positive thing because it's creating different opportunity, but the skills aren't coming along as quickly as we're displacing the workplace. And then it's the plethora of companies that have entered the technology space, so you think about, banks would have been, years ago would have been physical property-based retail outlets, whereas now I would speculate that most banks probably recruit more towards technology than they ever do in retail stuff. Certainly, the larger, you look at fintechs and you look at companies like BlackRock who've actively self-identified as fintechs versus banks. And then, every retailer, every manufacturer, it just means that there's this, that what's already an underfed skills market is just getting even further stretched because the widening the consumption of that talent. Right.
Yeah. Vivian, is it a similar position for you?
I suppose it's different in the sense that we're recruiting in the RPO business for recruiters to deliver upon our clients' talent acquisition strategies, right? So we have part of my role, and a big part of my role is ensuring that our talent acquisition strategy mirrors theirs. And as that changes and the global economy evolves, one of the key reasons a lot of organisations do outsource is actually flex and scale. And I think in the past, we've been guilty, I think, on both sides of actually constraining ourselves in order to be able to deliver that contractually. Right. And what I mean by that is that you want to be able to deliver flex and scale, but at the same time, the organisation wants to be able to deliver to its business managers and business leaders that recruitment partner sort of interface. If you're going to truly be flexible and truly be scalable, there has to be an element of that is potentially contingent, looking at the part-time workforce, but it's balancing that kind of delivery against the reality of what is now required, and particularly I think with the language capabilities, right? So in the EMEA region, we're dealing with a huge amount of languages. Our clients are requesting, I'm not saying more obscure, but probably the less common languages that we've delivered in the past. So the Nordics is now a huge part of what we're trying to deliver, and sometimes not at the volume that we would typically expect. So we have to be quite creative in saying, okay, so therefore we need to find people who might work across different clients for us, but we've also got to find clients who are willing for us to provide recruiters who might be working across a number of different clients without losing that quality piece. So slightly different for us.
Sure. But one of the things that I pull out from all three is that it's very much a challenge in terms of the talent who is out there, the talent pool, if you like. On the one hand, it's sort of finding that talent pool, finding people who can do the job, but also sort of almost convincing your organizations that you should accept them and that they are capable of doing the roles that you're bringing them into. Have there been any sort of, what are you doing in terms of extending the talent pool? Is there a diversity sort of agenda, or are you finding them from different places?
I think in our case it helped that since 2.5 years we have a new CEO, bit of the new generation CEO, who immediately said, okay, we need to be prepared that at one point we run out of business. If things start flying, we have flying cars, nobody needs a car. Or needs a tire. So everybody was in straight panic.
Yeah, make wings. You can make wings, that'll be fine.
We need to make new things.
So he clearly had the vision, okay, this is where we need to go. And we did an acquisition of, maybe some of you know, a part of TomTom, telematics, to get solutions in. So we moved more to tires as a solution, mobility solutions. And that actually generated also some excitement with other companies. And we recently started to also team up with the university to kind of see what is the new generation looking for from an onboarding perspective, how to hook them, how to talk them into the company. So it's really moving away from the traditional way of recruiting and really say, okay, try to bring the outside world in, and then try to have our managers change to make sure that you get those people in for a reason, so don't brainwash them to do it the way that we've been doing it for so many years. So it's a bit of a two-way, it's the external component and the internal component. Yeah.
I think to add to that, I think first of all, I think technology is a big part of the solution. So as you mentioned, former IBM leader just rolled off in the last few days. And one of the last things I delivered for them was a selection module based around skills inference, based around learning agility, based around cognitive intelligence. Because if you can't get the 10 out of 10 skills, at what point do you say that 7's okay? And how do you bridge those gaps? And it's through learning agility, through skills inference, through looking at success profiles of people who have gone on to do that role and the identifiers in the background. We talked about blockchain before. So one of the problems we solved is there's circa 70,000 open blockchain requisitions globally. There's about 20,000 blockchain engineers globally, give or take, right? So the numbers don't really, even if you hired everyone, it was to rotate immediately, there'd still be a deficit. So then you start looking at, well, what makes a good blockchain developer? Well, it's a Java engineer that has a high degree of learning agility and then a certain intellectual profile from a cognitive intelligence perspective. So do you wait for a year and not fill the job, or do you hire a Java developer, give them blockchain and have them up and running in 6 months? And so it's that kind of conversation. So I think first of all, technology plays a part. The second part's really important about this collaboration piece around, hiring managers very rarely, not never, but very rarely do they sympathize with the plight of the recruiter and the HR department, if I can say that. And very rarely they say that they would buy into that. So I think there's got to be an element here of schooling, and that's probably a very soft way for what I actually mean. It's probably more directive and autocratic than that. Okay. Around, are you trusted to hire? Are you qualified to make this decision? And if we are in a world of compromise, how do we get you to the point where you're accepting of that compromise? And then I think the third component is recruiter behavior. I think that it's very easy with the way that we measure recruiters now, having this homogenized approach to KPIs. It really does mask some performance, because you can say, oh, my average time to fill is 65 days. And everyone's like, oh, great, it's down 10 days from last year. Yeah. But actually, you just better fill in frontline service engineers. You've taken that down to 15 days. But actually, your blockchain engineers, your cloud architects, that's gone from 90 to 130. But your homogenized performance that the business really doesn't put pressure on the right areas. So, and until we start looking at technology where it's pushing, it's supporting the candidates that aren't quite right, it's directing the hiring managers to make better decisions from a more informed perspective, and directing recruiters to do better work in the areas where that create the most business value. There's 3 different streams to solve it.
Sure. Yeah. Vivian?
I'm just trying to think about this from a client perspective or an internal kind of RPO perspective, right?
Even more complicated.
I would say there's a huge amount to play here when it comes to market data. And what I mean by that is, the role of a recruiter now is so much more than I think it ever was. If I think about the time when I was a recruiter versus now, the data that's available to recruiters, the information that's at their fingertips in terms of the demographics out there, where talent actually is available, depending on whether or not the hiring manager wants to hear that, the information's there. So a lot of what we look for in recruiters now is really that ability to be able to be confident in taking information that's out in the market and saying, okay, you're looking for that unicorn and these are the reasons why, and we've all heard that sort of expression, right? But the information is so much more now. And it can really help to inform better decisions outside of that hiring manager's world and much more from a business and strategy perspective where, I think there was someone earlier on who was saying that, as part of a business, they were looking at information like that to determine where they were going to set up their new innovation centre.
Yeah.
So, rather than it being really, really reactive, here's a job, go and fill it, we've now got so much more data to be able to say, are we looking for the right people in the right place with the right skills? Do they exist? If they don't, where do we go to find them and how do we reach them in this more sort of global economy?
Vivian touched on kind of superficially touched on a really good point, though. There is more coming at the CHRO and the heads of recruitment than ever before in terms of additional add-ons, additional insights, additional tools. I can't go into detail about where I'm going from my next venture perspective, but it's very much orientated around we've got to start consolidating some of this stuff because there is way too much. And what really worries me, particularly for the CHRO, with the idea of you've got to be in analytics if you're a CHRO, you've got to be in predictability, you've got to be in AI. The thing that's going to slip off the table is going to be the talent agenda. And you already start to see it. More and more you're seeing heads of talent and heads of talent acquisition being pushed a layer or two away from the CHROs because they've got so much coming at them. I have complete sympathy. There is so much coming at them. And we've got to, it's being, I went to an event recently. The amount of new entrants into the HR tech market, is unbelievable. And everybody's sticking AI on it and not really understand what it means. But it is, it's what Vivian kind of touched on. It's going to be a problem. It's for all this stuff that's going to come at us. Yes, it gives us great insights, but you've got to be really careful how you use it because you're just going to be overwhelmed. And I think about, IBM, an organization that's grown up through acquisition in different countries and disparate teams. The recruiters there at one point were working on 50 plus systems because, it just depended on where you sat. It wouldn't be all 50, it'd be a different combination of 10. So how does that work for a recruiter who's in Germany but needs to recruit in the Nordics because there's a demand there? So
absolutely,
it's an amplifying problem.
Sure.
I really like that phrase. Technology does not a good recruiter make, but a good recruiter can make technology work for them, and I think that's what it comes down to, right? That you can throw so many things at somebody, and if it makes them less efficient and more confused, then it's a no-win situation.
Yeah. So from your perspective, then let's talk a little bit about technology and how that sort of can outreach to candidates with things like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, all of these different methodologies, channels, if you like. Are there any which you have specifically been able to use, which you prefer over others, strategically use? Or is there more of a kind of emphasis of, well, we know that we can just put something on Facebook, X number of people will see it, spray and pray, I suppose. What's going on?
I think no one's going to admit to spraying and praying.
No. But are you using things like social media in order to target?
Well, I think we've got the different populations. So we've got the new skills that we are looking for, that is on Facebook, Instagram, you name it, and where the brand's marketing team is helping us to give a push. Mm-hmm. But then we still have people that we need in the factories that just go with their CV to the plant and say, I need a job. So we go from one extreme to the other. I think the challenge with the new skills that we're looking for, it's not only finding the candidates, but how do we act quickly? And we're still a company where, I think somebody mentioned it, there were 27 interviews. We, even for the guys in the factory, they need to do 6 tests, 3, 5, 7 interviews And we like, though the pace needs to go higher, because if they already do that with that population, imagine that we get somebody in who knows artificial intelligence, it's going to be a year process. So it's not only finding the candidate, but also push them through the process quicker.
Sure.
That's a good point. I guess looking at the wastage all the way through the process is kind of off topic a little bit from your question, but the wastage in the process is phenomenal. And, the idea is, I think for a long time you have a lot of HR leaders and a lot of even business leaders running around talking about the applicant volume as being like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
We need to reduce the number of applicants. I will tell you, I was in a room recently with the heads of TA from all of the competitive technology companies. We cited the number one challenge that we could solution right now would be funnel management. Having so much coming at us because you have recruiters that spend days looking through 300 applicants on a job because they're required to, knowing full well there is a minimal chance that we will fill that job through the application. So it's not a vanity project. And people make these statements like, oh, it's harder to get in this company than it is to get into Harvard and stuff like that because we get like 10x the number of applicants. You're not comparing the same thing. First of all, that social economic situations drive that as well. But there is this thing around it's. The funnel management is really important. And it's back to the point I made before about like directing recruiters' work. So one of those three streams I mentioned before is you've got to get recruiters doing the work that's of value. There's no point in putting a job advert out for blockchain engineers in where I live, Manchester, and then basically dealing with 300 applicants from people that work in a 7-Eleven or a gas station. Yeah. Where's the productive time for the recruiter? And so I do think that the idea, and this is where technology needs to help, and look at where are you filling your jobs from. So driving the behavior of the recruiter, not just saying, oh, you have these 20 things. Recruiter, you decide what you do, but actually giving them more support. It's like, no, we're not going to allow you to post that because we don't fill those jobs through applicants. So don't waste your time by going through all these applicant stuff. Yeah. There's got to be a different way.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, is keeping an eye on your ROI, and particularly with your sourcing channels, right? Because it is really, really easy to get carried away with that, and particularly with things like job postings, LinkedIn licenses. When you actually look at some of the ROI on that, in particular countries, geographies in particular, and the cost of those licenses, etc., versus actually where you're getting your candidates from. It's really, really important to keep an eye on that. And I think the whole theme of the last couple of days has been about agility and adaptability, and the only way you can do that is by continually monitoring. And readjusting your approach.
Yeah.
So just to your point, I think where to find a candidate is where we see that it's not an easy sell, the industry where we are. And we see that with a couple of new leaders coming in, also including plant managers, people start to talk about, the work-life balance, the different shift schedules. And it might sound really strange, but it makes people tick. And we've actually seen that in the new plant that we have in Hungary, there is much more word to mouth. People say, okay, where do you work? How does it go? And we've seen a peak in diversity because of a female plant manager really spending a lot of time in the community to talk about, we do this for people with young children, we do this for that. And she didn't even need an advertisement. She just needed to go out there and position herself. Yeah. Versus the other plants where it's, silence.
So, are any of you sort of monitoring technology use in any way? Are there sort of solutions which are enabling you to sort of do that, so that you are monitoring what comes back, tracing that further down the line in terms of was that applicant successful? Is it possible to do that with the type of technology that's there now?
It is, but I think it needs to come on, and it's coming. Right. It's coming. Yeah, it's coming. So.
And do you think is that also just through the sort of free social media that's out there, or are you looking at?
You have to be careful with some of that stuff, though, because not to pick on any one company, but you touched on LinkedIn. I mean, they're in the business of selling you more licenses and more space and more activity. So I think you've got to own those analytics and those insights as much as you possibly can. And you've got to take what they give you and overlap it and overlay it with all your other stuff, because, I don't blame them for that. It's capitalism. They're in the business of making money. They're interested to sell you more product. And so, you sit down, Indeed, LinkedIn, whatever, they're all going to tell you how they're doing more for you, your fulfillment than the other.
Sure.
I actually think it's harder now to track where your applicants are actually coming from because of GDPR. Because ultimately, you know, a lot of the social media channels are more of a, I suppose, a branding kind of awareness piece, right? So in really practical terms, even if you reach out as a recruiter directly to a candidate because of GDPR legislation within EMEA, you really, you know, ideally you have to then get them to actually physically apply because of data privacy, etc., through the website, right? And then sometimes the only way you can then track where they've truly come from is by asking a question, which they may or may not answer, or they might just pick the top one. And then you know, if you really want to get into that data, you're then asking a recruiter to then revalidate that information when they're interviewing or then placing that candidate. So honestly, I think that, as you were saying, there's a long way to go in that. And it's kind of baffling when all of this tech and everything is exploding, yet some of the real fundamentals like that are still actually quite difficult.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and there was an interesting court case, I don't know if you saw it, there was a recent court case where LinkedIn actually lost a case disputing that its data was public information to be scraped, and that's going to have big implications. You know, that's, you know, so court in the US has ruled that it's fair game, it's public information. So now the fact that you can possibly start to look at other products that will solicit information more broadly within the GDPR guidelines, but can actually give you much greater access, because if me as an individual has chosen to put it on certain platforms, I thereby acknowledge that this is public insight.
Sure. Yeah.
That can only help us, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, can we talk a little bit about the sort of the candidate experience once they are, or the employee experience once they are within the businesses? Because obviously we've talked a lot about the acquisition, the going out there and finding the talent and attracting them, but also there's the side of making them stay. And want to make sure that they, you know, you don't sort of lose them to the next person who sort of offers them the next best opportunity. Has that become more important for your organisations? And if so, what kind of things are you doing to make sure that, I suppose it ties in with engagement, but also it's more in terms of this whole experience?
I think it's good. It's crucial. You can't, you know, be, you know, sold this, you know, Valhalla, and then you come in and you think, whoa, I didn't sign up for this, where does this come from? So it can't be, you know, black and white. I think this is the strength of talent acquisition. I think we can sell the job, we can sell the company, but in our case, we need to be very, very realistic. I mean, this is what you sign up for, are you ready? We prefer that you tell us no now, before we start investing in the whole journey. The big challenge is mainly the people managers who paint this magnificent picture during the interview, and then it already kind of goes down the drain the moment the person has signed the contract, let alone the onboarding. Because onboarding is something for HR. Well, no, let us go back to... and that's kind of the vault where we then, you know, the talent person really feels the responsibility to stay in touch with the candidate and talk the person into the company. And then the relationship starts with talent acquisition and not with the manager. And that's the big issue. Then there are questions and the new hire comes to talent acquisition. Remember, we discussed it in the interview. What about this? What about this? And that's our biggest challenge, to say the talent acquisition part, or the HR leader or whoever, you play a part, but line manager, this is your responsibility. Yeah. And we need to do a lot of hand-holding, depending on the location, depending on the role. Because that's where the discrepancy comes in, where the person says, okay, I'm all fired up, I'm ready for it, here I come. And the manager is like, oh, but you need a laptop, right? Where's your badge? That drives me really crazy. Because then you put so much effort in getting somebody in. And to your point earlier, you did this whole selection of your funnel and you've got your amazing candidate. And then the manager is like, and what am I supposed to do now? I'm like, oh God, so that employee experience needs to...
HR's got to own that a little bit as well. Like, listen, don't get me wrong. Like, I love that we work in the HR sector. I love that we work in talent acquisition specifically. But for years, up until, you know, the agenda changed for HR, in order to stay relevant, HR has positioned itself as the onboarder and the person that facilitates the laptop. So we can't just say, well, it's not your job. We've got to unwind the narrative that HR has created before HR actually found a different way to be relevant to the organization, which is around development of talent, which is around attaching itself closer to the commercials of the organization, closer to the revenue to demonstrate real capability and value versus just, we're the personnel department. Because that's what it was. And we've got to unwind now the fact that, for years we've painted that narrative. We've got to change the narrative, which is, it's not our responsibility to order your laptop. It's not our responsibility for us to do onboarding. It's our responsibility to give you the platform for successful onboarding, but it's not our responsibility to do it. And I think the second part is, I really think that, back to the point I made before around, the education system is flawed in terms of supporting the skills gap. Which I think more companies need to lobby more governments on. I also think, the way the employment law is created and how prohibitive it is, it doesn't support a differentiated way of working. It doesn't support the fact that people may want to work for the same company 16 times in a career, but never be tied to that company. The fact that they may want to have 2 jobs. You've seen the explosion of things like Fiverr and Upwork and all these different things. You had the Mayor of London who tried to ban Uber. Well, last time I looked, got in an Uber in London, the guy who was driving it wasn't handcuffed to the steering wheel against his will. He'd made a life choice, but who's going to pay his taxes? Who's the account? And so, you've got to, there's all these different facets, but ultimately, we've got to get more support from governments in terms of creating these differentiated ways of working, because it's coming, and the generations that are coming through, they're not going to join us in the post room and dream of being the CEO in 35 years. They couldn't care less about that journey.
No. They want it in 2 years.
Probably, yeah. So it's different.
Yeah. Vivian, have there been...
Nothing to add, really.
Nothing to add.
I mean, it's all pretty much covered. But I think the thing is, right, I think the thing that really strikes me is that, it's talent acquisition, talent management, learning, and everything kind of working in silo, but having to find ways to overlap and talk to each other and ultimately deliver what needs to be delivered. And you're absolutely right in saying there's a responsibility there, I think, from an HR perspective, totally, because if it's not coming from there, where's it coming from, right? To be really blunt. And we can keep talking about the fact that hiring managers are, can vary in terms of their capability in that area, but ultimately whose responsibility is it to upskill, like you say, and to kind of meet those gaps?
Sure.
But I think what you said earlier is true, and I think this is also the role of HR, where we've been very accommodating, and we looked after you, and we're kind of like the mother then getting everybody together. But now if you move to new technology like self-service, I mean, we have a couple of managers who's like, do I need to create a ticket? And you think, yes, you can book your Airbnb in Uganda, but you can't create a ticket to get a laptop for your new person, right? This whole...
Good point.
It is, which kind of mind-boggling. Anyway. I'm not always popular with those comments in my company. I just shake it up a bit.
I'd like to throw it open to everyone in just a minute, but very quickly, I think Kevin has touched on some of the challenges for the future. But just to go along, all 3 of you, where do you think it's going to go from here? Is the whole thing going to get even more complicated? Do you think companies are actually going to adapt and you will find a way through? Or is it just, we're actually at the bottom of the mountain here and we've got a bit of a slog?
Oh, wow.
God, that's a big one.
That's a big one.
I mean, for me, one of the first shifts would be, and again, not to, I love what we do, but we've got to help HR people commercialize their organization and start to demonstrate real value by attaching themselves to where they create that value. And I think there's we've seen it in other areas, but I do think there's a generational shift between what HR needs to be in the future and what it is today. And I think I see that as quite heavily conflicted in many of the companies I work, like I say, I work with a lot of other companies as well. And I do see that as a conflict. I do go into organizations that are asking and pulling on a different thread for HR, but they're dealing with the personnel manager. As much as I say, we've got to change the narrative, we've got to change the skills within HR, we've got to change the way we think, we've got to change how we measure ourselves. We've got to demonstrate our value commercially. It's for too long, TA leaders, I was talking to somebody about this earlier, for too long, even TA leaders, they self-define their performance metrics. They set an arbitrary set of KPIs, which is productivity KPIs. And I go, listen, I did this for 15 years. I'd go into a meeting and I'd put my KPIs up, it'd be green across the board, and I'd say, we're better at recruitment than we were a year ago. And it's not. It's Kevin's running the recruitment team better. That's not how good is the company at the business of talent acquisition.
Sure.
That is different. That is how good am I at running recruitment teams. I've been doing that for 20 years, so I've made enough mistakes to know what to avoid.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell you how good is the organization at the business of talent acquisition. And we've got to start pushing that out, make it more commercial.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, actually, I think a lot of it also depends on, let's not get it wrong, right? You could be the most commercial, the most influential HR leader, out there, but ultimately, if you don't have a CEO or a board who wants to listen to that, or who are innovative and agile, there's only so much you can do. That's the reality of the situation.
In a way, it helps if you kind of, schmooze them a bit. And,
Like
when we had a new CEO,
there,
we just had him do, like an interview with a search firm on his digital strategy. Oh my! I mean, he was like, ta-da! And we posted it on, the chatbot, on the internet, on YouTube, and he kind of like, oh, I've got people that are, he got his personal brand got stronger, and I think many of them are very inward focused. And I think they also need to be talent magnets, right? I mean, they're all traveling. They go, in our case, to all the car show, the motor shows, truck shows. They're everywhere. So I'm like, so do you meet people? Do you go outside of your booth and have your talent radar?
Yeah.
And they just look at you like, no, I'm there to do business. Yeah, but that's your opportunity to... And that is also something interesting to... Mm-hmm. They're not ready for that.
So a bit of this and more of this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So.
Let me see, is anyone in the audience, questions, comments, whatever? Yes, I think Bill's got
he's in the...
I know. Bill,
we can see you.
Come back close to a microphone. Can we go? Oh, no, we're going to come down to you now. Thank you.
Stand up, maybe you can see me. Sorry, I'm going to get that at the right distance there. Firstly, guys, thank you. I thought that was a really spirited discussion, and Ingrid, you got a spontaneous round of applause. I think that's the first time we've seen that today. Kevin, I was very interested in something you said, so I'd like to just pull you back to the middle of the discussion, and it was when we were talking about the blockchain, the dearth of talent in blockchain, and you used an analogy which was, if a recruiter's got 400 applications for a blockchain role, but they're all from folks who work in the 7-Eleven or a gas station, then the productivity of that recruiter, or the likelihood that that recruiter's going to be successful is going to diminish. But I was kind of wondering, given that dearth of talent, just what if 2 of those people out of that 400 have the aptitude, the capability, and the willingness to be great blockchain developers, to be the best blockchain developers in the entire organisation, but they just haven't been given the chance.
So this is the point.
I'm kind of wondering how you get those 2.
So my dream would be, it's a great point, and it is finding the needle in the haystack, and that's where the lost productivity is will they go through the 400? For me, as I said, I just implemented a process where when you pass the recruiter phone screen, you're then tested for learning agility, cognitive intelligence, so removing competency-based assessment. I personally would roll that back to application for a couple of reasons. First of all, give everybody an equal opportunity to demonstrate capability, not the 20 random candidates out of 400 that have been picked. Secondly, what I also think it would drive, and this is me speaking candidly and a little bit self-serving, is I actually think it would drive a better experience. So if you applied to me now, and there's a good chance that application is going to disappear into the black hole, into the funnel, right? Because that's what happens with most large organizations. If I actually emailed you the next day and say, we might be interested in you, will you do these tests, which are gamified, only take about 15 minutes, so we can understand, firstly, if you're right for us. Secondly, is this even the right role for you to be looking at? Because we might have another point of entry based on your score, which actually you're not going to be good for blockchain. You're going to be good for architecture or DevOps or somewhere else. So open up the aperture of the discussion by moving assessment further back. I don't believe it'll be an inhibitor. Most companies will fear that because they'll be like, no, it's just we need the candidate to be engaged. I actually don't think this generation would mind. If you go back and say, listen, we might be interested, first of all, you feel like you've progressed. So you're no longer in the black hole. You're like, oh, they've actually responded to me. And they're going to ask me to assess myself for the role. And not only that, they're going to open up the 50,000 roles they hire every year to see if any of them might work for me. I absolutely agree with you. But right now, while we're not doing that, you're just 2 in 400, and there's a small chance you're going to get discovered, and it is a problem.
Thanks very much. Hi guys.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. Great panel. Nice diversity of industry. So I've got a question to all three of you, based really in the recruitment, HR, hiring. It's massively data driven, more now than ever. It'll be even bigger in the future. So for the three of you, what is that one KPI or that one piece of data that you chase hardest, or that you check more than any other? What is that golden number that you chase harder than any others?
So for us, it's time to fill. But then there is a discussion what is fast and what is slow. Because the moment it's long, the business tends to blame HR. If it's very short, they're very proud of themselves. So it's this, but time to fill is, But to your point earlier, it's the type of position.
It's homogenized, yeah.
Yeah. That's and we want to have more, but we're like, okay, we first want to end the discussion on one KPI before we open the whole box. And then, we've got dashboards and you're being killed by your own sheet of data.
Mine is the one that I look at the most is percentage of aged requisitions, which is actually really similar, right, and really tied in, because it's inevitably quite indicative of there being issues somewhere along the chain that warrant further investigation. So that's probably, that's absolutely ours, and anything that kind of creeps over about 15% is normally an indicator where we'd get more involved.
Yeah, I don't know how you could possibly ask me to choose my favourite KPI. I love them all. I love all my children equally. But actually, I was actually going to say the same one, which is I like the latency view on roles. Is what percentage do we have over 60 days, over 90 days, over 120 days? We have a specific target against each of those. And actually, what is our percentage? So at a very high level, there's massive stories beneath them. You've got to dive into them. But as an executive running a talent acquisition function, that's the one that I look to. That one or wastage, so yield, just as an overall KPI. So I know there's a bunch of KPIs in that, conversion rates and all that kind of stuff. But anything that talks to wastage and yield, right now, bear in mind, as a head of TA, you're running a services organization. You're solving a maths problem, an algorithm of, I've got to do X with, utilization, capacity, demand. You're solving a mathematic problem. So first of all, you've got to think about it like a services and a consulting company, which is then, utilization and capacity management is critical, and then start to look at yield and wastage.
But you clearly have a system where you can track all of that, because
I would assume nothing.
Okay.
I would assume nothing.
It's called Excel.
I know, yeah. Microsoft has a spreadsheet version. Yeah.
That's just one button, it's fine.
Yeah. I'm very good at writing formulas.
Anybody else want to comment, question? No? Yes, over here.
I really loved the discussion. It was very robust, and I loved all, particularly the focus on the relevance and the commerciality of HR. In terms of, talent acquisition, what about predictive analysis? How much have you looked at that in terms of, I know you've touched on it, but your customer centricity, when you're anticipating and predicting behavioural traits that will allow people to be more successful in, say, sales roles, etc. How far have you progressed in that way? Or what's your view of it?
So we said, okay, we know what we have now. We know where we need to go. So let's hire people that have something completely different than we already have, right? We've got 100 years of legacy of building tires. We know how to do that. What we don't know is the whole suite that I mentioned earlier, right? All that kind of digital big data thing. So we actually looked at be a bit disruptive and also start sharing CVs where it's not the usual suspect and where the manager was like, oh, no, we can't do that. Okay, why? Don't look at that, but tell us why. and started to kind of map capabilities, the learning agility, all of the stuff that's separate from the product knowledge, but really look at the personality and hire for the future, not somebody who can do the job now, but where is this person going to be in 10 years from now? And that's where some managers feel like, okay, so are you hiring my successor? Yes. Yeah, to be honest, yes, because the vault is empty for me.
You need a successor.
Yeah.
So we have success profiles at Corn Ferry. So they're an amalgamation of both for ourselves, but for our clients. Every role we've ever filled in any geography at any sort of skill level, in terms of traits, capabilities, behaviours, and what good looks like. So all of our recruiters now have access to that library, and when we work with a client, we have a success profile for every role. So we also apply that internally, and as a result of that, that kind of goes through that whole talent life cycle. So we use that for talent acquisition as well as development, and as well as then looking at our career architecture and what it might take for someone to move from this success profile to that success profile. So we've been doing an awful lot of work on that based on the IP that we've generated as a business.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think to be more disruptive, I think that we have predictive analytics right now. We have insights that are available to a lot of us. But the problem you still have is you still have this hourglass system of hiring, which is you have all this. It goes into the one manager who makes the hiring decision, then it spins out. And so you've got to democratize that decision a lot more and create an ecosystem. Just as managers have different capabilities in their roles, they have different capabilities around their ability to hire people and good people and make assessments. So the more you can support them by opening it up, having more of an ecosystem of decision, even that possibly, I don't think hey, remove the decision from the manager, but actually start to show that there's a lot of insights, there's a lot of stuff, and actually start to report out and say, actually, this is the person you should be hiring. Still leave the decision with them, but if they consistently go against that and the performance of that team isn't absolutely optimum, then there's a benchmark to say, hey, why aren't you using this insight? If they do go on to be optimum, you can take that data and spin it back and say, this is the model that we should be using. And I think more and more, if you look at the HR tech stack, which I care passionately about the HR tech stack, if you look at it for a long time, the narrative has been from the industry around having these disparate systems, having these big HRIS, VMS, CRM, ATS, outbound candidate management tool, whatever, by just using connectors. And there's got to be something that brings together a more homogenized view of creating this ecosystem. Because I can guarantee, if you went into many companies right now and you said, let's pull out the insights that your HRIS give you, and let's pull out the insights that your ATS give you, I bet it's not the same data, because the systems are thinking about it in a completely different way, and they're inferring what you're asking for in a completely different way. So for me, there needs to be a little bit more than just connectors and APIs that these systems will talk to each other. They've got to start talking to each other that creates an ecosystem of decisions.
Okay, well, that is all we have time for the panel. Before giving them a well-deserved round of applause, I'd also like to say, if any of you wish to get in touch with me, at HRO EMEA, do email me. I'm very easily emailable on at simon@simonkent.co.uk. Dead easy. You can also find it on the magazine as well. So if you have stories or anything like that, please do get in touch. In the meantime, can I thank you all, Vivian, Kevin, and Ingrid. Fantastic panel. Thank you.